You mentioned earlier other scholars who have recognized the relationship between same-sex marriage or the prospect of it and deinstitutionalization. I want you to turn now to the document behind tab 17 of your binder.
17. Okay.
And what is that, please?
Well, this is an article by Andrew Cherlin, who's a prominent family sociologist, and he teaches at Johns Hopkins. He's a proponent of same-sex marriage, and this article is entitled "The Deinstitutionalization of American Marriage."
Would you turn to page 850 of that excerpt, and if you'll look in the right-hand column of the page, first full paragraph there, would you read that first sentence?
The most recent development in the deinstitutionalization of marriage is the movement to legalize same-sex marriage.
And does this is this authority among those you've relied upon to arrive at your judgment on this subject?
Yes.
Your Honor, this document is marked DIX-49, and I'd like to offer it into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
DIX-49 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And if you'll continue in your binder to the document behind tab 18.
Yes. Oh, this is an article called "The Struggle for Same-Sex Marriage," written by Professor Norval Glenn, who's a prominent family sociologist from the University of Texas at Austin. This was published in 2004.
And would you turn to page 26 of that document, please? And again, in the right-hand column at the top of the page, if you'll read the passage beginning with the word "however," please.
However, acceptance of the arguments made by some advocates of same-sex marriage would bring this trend to its logical conclusion, namely, the definition of marriage as being for the benefit of the couple who enter into it rather than as an institution for the benefit of society, the community, or any social entity larger than the couple.
And was this among the sources that you relied upon for your thinking on this?
Yes, and it may be worth noting that these two authors who I've just cited are both prominent scholars, but they are on opposite sides of the policy question on whether we should adopt gay marriage.
And are there others who have identified this phenomenon of deinstitutionalization of marriage in connection with the same-sex marriage?
Yes.
Your Honor, this document is marked DIX-60, and I'd like to now offer it into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well, 60 is admitted. Would you remind me just where on page 26 the witness is referring?
Yes. The very top of the page of the right-hand column begins with the word "however" there, the second word on that column.
Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Blankenhorn, how confident are you that redefining marriage to include same-sex marriage, same-sex couples, would further the deinstitutionalization of marriage?
Well, it's impossible to be completely sure about a prediction of future events. Well, I don't think anyone can. But I do have a great deal of confidence in the likelihood of the weakening of marriage through the process of deinstitutionalization to a greater degree than would be the case otherwise if we move toward the adoption, the widespread adoption of same-sex marriage. And you know, if you think about it, it's really hard to imagine how it could be otherwise. If you change the definition of the thing, it's hard to imagine how it could have no impact on the thing. I mean, if you change the structure of the thing, it's hard to imagine how you could not have an effect on the content of the thing. And if you decisively move an institution from the public realm to a question overwhelmingly of private ordering rather than public purpose that can be specified, it's hard to imagine a more textbook example of what scholars mean when they say deinstitutionalization. And we do know from evidence that the process of deinstitutionalization has already weakened marriage and could weaken it more in the future. So, while I don't think anyone here can say that they know from scientific study based on data that they know with absolute certainty that this will happen, I sincerely believe that this is a likely outcome. This is a likely result of adopting same-sex relationships, same-sex marriage.
Your Honor, I'd like to publish now demonstrative. My next demonstrative, I think, is number 9. Yes, and ask the witness a series of questions. I'm getting close to the end of the examination, Your Honor. A series of questions about the consequences that he believes will likely flow from redefining marriage to include same-sex couples. And the first question I'd like to ask is this. How, in your opinion, would the further deinstitutionalization of marriage caused by the legalization of same-sex marriage manifest itself in society?
I'm sorry. Would you mind restating that question?
In what ways, in your opinion, will extending marriage to same-sex couples and therefore, in your opinion, deinstitutionalize further the deinstitutionalization of marriage manifest itself in society?
Well, as we have discussed now, I think a likely consequence is an acceleration of deinstitutionalization or devaluation that would help to produce higher rates of non-participation in marriage, higher rates of fragility, of one-parent homes, divorce, the general, all of the consequences that we have discussed in the last hour or so of the weakening of the institution relating to divorced, non-marital cohabitation or children outside of charge and so forth. My fear, really, and my conclusion is that this is a likely outcome.
How, in your opinion, would redefining marriage to include same-sex couples impact the traditional view that a child needs both its mother and its father?
Well, I've had some experience with this because since 1995, I may have spent just as much time as anybody in the country saying children need the fathers. And it seems like it ought to be a simple idea that shouldn't get you in a lot of trouble. But I can tell you it does. And one of the things that I think will happen, and I can already see it beginning to happen, is that simply saying publicly that a child needs and deserves her father will go from being what it is now, which is mildly controversial, will go to being viewed as simply inappropriate public speech, as really beyond the pale, as offensive, as divisive, as mean-spirited. If it's hard for me to see how, if you cannot speak publicly about a value, then it's hard for me to see how that could do anything other than to weaken the value over time if you cannot say its name. And I have had personal experience with this, as well as my observation. And I may sound simplistic, but simply being able to say that a child needs its mother and father if that becomes just impermissible in any venue, a church, a school, a civic group, a PTA meeting, I think we may lose something precious.
Your Honor, I object and move to strike. That goes beyond even the most expansive definition of expertise, even in a bench trial.
Very well. I will overrule the objection. You indicated that you are getting close to the end.
Your Honor, we're approaching it rapidly, thank you. What impact, in your opinion, Mr. Blankenhorn, would extending marriage to same-sex couples have on alternative marriage forms and family structures?
I think it would have the impact of further mainstreaming the acceptability and prevalence of these alternative family forms.
And what in particular do you have in mind there?
Well, you know, when Canada adopted same-sex marriage several years ago, they struck the term natural parent from Canadian law and replaced it with the term legal parent. And the implications of that, I think, are very profound in terms of transfer of power to the state and so forth. But it indicates that there is a growing trend for family forms in which the child will not be raised by her own biological parent. So there is the diminution, the diminished likelihood of, there's an increased likelihood of children being raised in family forms other than her own two parents, her own two natural parents. There's also a possibility, you know, there could be the possibility of more public willingness to consider family forms such as polygamy that involve more than two people.
Mm. And what's the basis of your concern about that?
Well, I think polygamist marriages are not in the interests of women, especially, and also not really in the interests of society. There's already a standing history of this in our society and many others. The concept that marriage involves only two people is probably the weakest of marriage's core rules. It's already tested significantly by polygamy and polyandry and polyamory. So I think if the rule of, if the concept of opposites, you know, the concept of man-woman goes, it's hard to imagine really that this is already being actively, you know, reviewed by scholars in the journals, and it's hard to, well, I'll just put it this way. It seems likely that over time, this aspect of the institution as well will come under criticism and calls for reform.
And why would redefining marriage as an adult-centric institution, as you have put it, increase the possibility of this?
Of what?
Of polygamy being an acceptable alternative family form.
Because the man-woman customary basis of marriage is reinforced by and is in turn reinforces the idea of limiting marriage to two. And if you knock out one of the pillars, the other one becomes less comprehensible and therefore less defensible.
Thank you. Mr. Blankenhorn, I would like to now turn to the last subject, and that is the issue of domestic partnerships. And I would like to ask you what your position is on domestic partnerships.
Well, I support them. I think that they could be a part of a kind of a humane compromise in which, on the one hand, we protect marriage and allow it to continue to carry out its distinctive contribution to society, while at the same time extending protections and recognition to gay and lesbian couples. I don't think it's a perfect solution, but I do think it's a possibly humane compromise on this issue, and I so stated in an article that I wrote in the New York Times. I co-authored with Jonathan Rauch last year.
Who is Jonathan Rauch?
He is a visiting scholar at the Brookings Institution. He's a prominent proponent of same-sex marriage, and his most recent book is called Gay Marriage, Why It's Good for Gays, Good for Straights, and Good for America.
And when did you publish this article you just referenced in the New York Times?
I think it was February 2009.
Have you always held that view that you have just articulated?
No. I've actually pretty much come full circle on the issue. I really hadn't thought about it very much. I was really focused on the topic of marriage, and I had not given the topic of domestic partnerships much thought. I certainly hadn't given it any careful consideration until about 2 years ago. There was an event. There was an event in Washington, D.C., a debate. Well, we call them conversations now, but we called it then a debate with Jonathan Rauch, and he kind of publicly challenged me and called me out on this topic and said, "Your thinking about domestic partnerships is immature and wrong, and you have to rethink it, and, you know, it's, I have also, speaking, Jonathan said he also was evolving his position on the topic, and he really challenged me in that forum to consider more carefully this idea, and I told him that I would, and I did. And that began a kind of a journey with him personally, and also with other leaders in the push who were pro same-sex marriage, where I tried to devote some real time to the topic, and that led then to Rauch and I writing the article endorsing civil unions or domestic partnerships in the New York Times.
Why hadn't you thought carefully about that issue of domestic partnerships prior to that time?
I didn't really think I had, I didn't feel that I had to think about them carefully at that time. I went into my first conversations about with a kind of an instinctive or general feeling that if you set up a comparable institution to marriage, that could have a weakening effect on marriage because, well, particularly if that comparable institution was open to opposite sexes as well. I was worried that you would have kind of a, well, you know, a smorgasbord effect of choosing. And I thought that that diversification would possibly weaken the marital institution. So I was very concerned that not happen. So I was personally suspicious of endorsing domestic partnerships for that reason. And the other reason was that Rauch and the others, you know, people that I was talking to, were just very vociferous in their denunciation of civil unions and domestic partnerships. They just said it was a horrible idea, that it was discriminatory, that it was that this was invidious, this was demeaning to gay and lesbian people, and that this was a form of unequal treatment. And I accepted that view. I was strongly influenced by that view. In fact, I repeated that view back of the bus, you know, discriminatory and wrong and unfair. And so for those reasons, my concerns about diluting marriage by setting up this dual institutional structure, and also the concerns about just the, I guess you might say the unfairness, the idea that this would be discriminatory. You know, I embraced that. I embraced both of those points of view just as an initial way of thinking about the topic without having written a thought much about it. But, and it was really then in a meeting with Rauch in 2007, and then the next 2 years, I tried to rethink it afresh. I tried to think about it deeply and carefully with Rauch and others, and that led to the written article about the subject that I published with him last year.
And I take it you no longer agree with the views that you had on the subject before?
I still worry that domestic partnerships could possibly have a weakening effect on the marital institution, but I think that it's something we should do anyway because of the other issues that are involved, and I have satisfied myself on this question of fairness. Well, that's been the big issue for me, you know, personally, the issue of is it unjust to have a domestic partnership program? That's been really the core journey and exploration that I have undergone on that issue. So my thinking on it now is that the core principle that we can hold out for our understanding is that marriage as a social institution is larger than the sum of its legal incidents. When we say the word marriage, it's a big institution that performs a very large contribution to society, and it's much bigger, much more powerful and potent as a role in society than merely or only the enumeration of its legal incidents. Marriage predates law. Marriage is not a creature of law in the same way that other things are. The law did not create marriage. We look to law to recognize and support marriage and to give it support, but we do not simply understand the institution only with reference to its legal incidents. So, if you look at the legal incidents of domestic partnerships and then look at the legal incidents of marriage, the fact that those legal incidents are comparable does not mean that we are looking at the same institution, the content of it. The marital institution is differently purposed, is specifically purposed. As I've tried to say today, probably more times than you want to hear, the purpose of it is to bring together the biological male and the biological female, to bring together the two genitors of the child, to make it as likely as possible that they are also the social and legal parents of the child. That's the lodestar. That's the distinctive contribution. There are others, but that's the distinctive and core contribution of the institution of marriage. Now, the domestic partnership institution is a differently purposed institution with respect to this bringing together, with respect to parenthood, particularly with respect to parenthood. The parenting process in the this lodestar notion that animates the marital institution is not the same that is operative in the domestic partnership institution. It is discriminatory and morally wrong, in my view, morally wrong to refuse to call two things that are the same by the same name. That was what the big thing I had to grapple with in my own mind, to be able to look myself in the mirror. And what I worked out with Rauch and others, I'm not saying he is responsible for my views. No, I'm saying that the process I'm describing of developing this proposal with Rauch, I had to be sure myself, personally, ethically, that this issue of this, is discrimination, to have an institution purposed in this way as a domestic partnership institution. That was the thing that I had to work out, and I have worked that out to my satisfaction, and it means a lot to me personally, but I feel that I've been able to understand this in a way that then allows me, as an advocate for customary marriage, to say we can have a compromise here. We don't all get everything we want, but we all have a humane compromise on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Blankenhorn.
Maybe we better take a brief recess for 10 minutes, and then we'll resume with the cross-examination of this witness.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
New binders?
Not quite yet, Your Honor, but soon.
I beg your pardon?
Not quite yet, but soon. I'm going to begin by asking some questions from the defendant's binders. Good afternoon, Mr. Blankenhorn.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes. Would you please turn to tab 16 in your binder? All right, and this was one of the documents that you indicated that you had relied on. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Cooper directed your attention to the first page, to a quotation where it said, "Children who grow up in a household with only one biological person are worse off average than children who grow up in a household with both of their biological parents." Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Now, there are a number of questions that I want to ask you about that, but did you understand the authors here to be asserting the fact that there was only one biological parent was casually related to the fact that the children were less well off?
Causally, yes, yeah, yes, that was my understanding, is my understanding.
That is your understanding.
Yes, sir.
Now, did you read the entire chapter?
I read the entire book.
Let me see if you remember reading the very next page, the first full paragraph. There are single motherhood and fatherhood absence. Therefore, the root of child poverty, school failure, and juvenile delinquency. Our findings lead us to say no. While living with just one parent increases the risk of each one of these negative outcomes, it is not the only or even the major cause of them. Do you recall reading that?
I do.
Now, you referred a number of times in your testimony to biological parents. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And you were not meaning to imply, were you, that biological parents were any better parents than adoptive parents?
No, sir.
In fact, the studies show that all things being equal, two adoptive parents raising a child from birth will do just as well as two biological parents raising a child from birth, correct?
No, sir, that's incorrect.
Well, sir,
may I say another word on that, please?
you will have an opportunity on redirect.
Okay. It was a clarifying thing and actually supports something you just said. The studies show that adoptive parents, because of the rigorous screening process that they undertake before becoming adoptive parents, actually on some outcomes outstrip the biological parents in terms of providing protective care for the children.
Yes, I was going to come to that, and I appreciate you getting there. But in addition to your Institute for American Family Values, they published something called the Marriage Index, correct?
Yes, sir.
And let me ask you that you be handed Plaintiff's Exhibit 2880. I didn't have this in the volume because I didn't know it was going to come up. Now, I'm informed we are more perceptive than I thought. It is in the binder number 1, which we will hand out. Now, this is a document you recognize. Is that correct, sir?
I'm sorry,
2880.
2880, thank you.
2880. It should be in numerical order. See it? It's in numerical order there.
Uh, 2880. Oh, I'm sorry. I just, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Here it is. Yes, sir, I have it.
And you recognize it?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I would offer Plaintiff's Exhibit 2880.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well, 2880 is in.
Now, when your Institute for American Values does its analyses, it treats adoptive parents and biological parents together, correct?
I did not do the research for this particular study, but it is, I would not at all be surprised if, for the purposes of this report, we followed what is a common practice among scholars in the field and lumped those two categories together for the purposes of this study. Now, if you want to compare outcomes for children who are adopted to outcomes for children in other family forms, you really have to do a study on that specific issue, and that is not what this is. But the answer to your question is, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we did not follow the customary, or a very common custom among researchers who, for a number of reasons, including practical, very, very practical ones, often tend to include in the, they clump them together in the way that you've just said.
Well, let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. Ordinarily, researchers include adoptive parents in the same category as biological parents. Is that what you said?
No, sir.
Okay, let me try again. In the research that you are familiar with, do researchers ordinarily include both biological parents and adoptive parents in the same category?
It depends on the question they're seeking to answer.
Well,
it depends on what they are studying.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. That is really the determinative factor.
All right. Let me just jump right down to the bottom line, okay, sir?
Okay.
Are you aware of any studies, and let's just talk about gay and lesbian couples. Let's just jump right to the bottom line. Are you aware of any studies showing that children raised from birth by a gay or lesbian couple have worse outcomes than children raised from birth by two biological parents?
No, sir.
Okay.
Would it be okay for me to say additionally
It would
that
not be okay for you to say anything or volunteer anything. I heard your that speech that just ended, and I'm really trying to move along. Okay, sir? You will have a chance to make speeches when your counsel is asking you questions.
Okay.
All right. Let me follow up on a question that your counsel did ask, which was about domestic partnerships. And I want to be sure I have your testimony. You thought a lot about domestic partnerships in recent years, correct?
My testimony was that I had not thought very much at all about them and had given really no serious consideration to them until I was kind of publicly challenged to do so in 2007 in an exchange with Jonathan Rauch, and that, as you, I'm sure you heard me say this whole thing. That's what happened.
Mm-hmm. Does that mean that the answer is that since 2007 you have given it a lot of thought, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is it your view that domestic partnerships contribute to the deinstitutionalization of marriage? And I would like you to begin with a yes, no, or I don't know.
Mr. Boies, I know the answer to your question,
Well, then,
but I cannot answer it if the only choices you're going to give me are the choices between the words yes and no.
No, it wasn't just between yes and no.
Well, you gave me three. You gave me I don't know, yes and no. I do know, but I cannot give you an accurate answer to the question if the only words I'm allowed to choose from are yes or no.
Well, listen to the question, okay?
I have heard of it, yeah, a word of it, yes.
All right, well, then tell me. What is the question?
You asked me if I had a view on this subject. You asked me if, well, you were asking me to state my opinion on this.
Well, I asked you whether it was your view that domestic partnerships contributed to the deinstitutionalization of marriage.
Well, my answer to your question is that I believe that they could do so. And an additional part of my answer is I believe that the risk,
I did not ask you whether the risk was worth it or not.
Well, then I won't tell you.
I asked you whether you had a view.
I do.
As to whether domestic partnerships increased the deinstitutionalization of marriage. You said they could. That's what you told me, right?
I said I thought it was possible or likely that they would.
Okay, Now possible and likely are two different standards.
Well, maybe we could rewind the tape and find out what I actually said. I think I maybe used the word that it was possible, but I can't recall the exact word that I used a moment ago.
All right, well, let's try to get what your view is, regardless of what you said before. In your view, do domestic partnerships increase the deinstitutionalization of marriage?
I believe that it's possible that they could do so.
Okay, now when you say it's possible, obviously anything is possible. Do you believe that it's likely that they do so?
I believe that those domestic partnerships...
Sir, I have got to ask you, this is going to move on a lot faster if at least you begin your answers with a yes, no, or I don't know.
You know, I cannot do that on this because there are different domestic partnerships. I have to be able to say what kind of domestic partnerships we're talking about.
Mr. Blankenhorn, counsel is entitled to an answer to his question.
Well, may I
See, that's
ask?
how this process works. There's a question, then there's an answer, and the answer has to respond to the question.
Well, does he mean domestic partnerships that are open to opposite-sex couples or not?
Let me take them one at a time, okay? And may I take it 1 and 3 times? First, do you believe that domestic partnerships that are open to opposite-sex couples increases the deinstitutionalization of
I
marriage?
believe that they would be likely to do so.
Okay. Now, do you believe that domestic partners that are not open to opposite-sex couples will increase the deinstitutionalization of marriage?
I believe that they would be dramatically less likely to do so.
Nevertheless, I want to know whether you think they would be likely to or not be likely to, sir. Even though they may be less likely, but would they nevertheless be likely to do so?
I don't know.
Do you believe that domestic partnerships are open to different sex couples, only when one of the participants is over 62, which happens to be the law in California, as I understand it, increases the deinstitutionalization of marriage?
Well, my answer is just the same as I just said. I believe they would be significantly less likely to do so.
Now, you believe that gays and lesbians today are raising children, correct?
Of course, yes.
And in fact, hundreds of thousands of children are being raised by gay and lesbian couples, correct?
I don't know how many.
Did you ever try to find out?
I did.
And were you able to make an approximation?
I was. Yes, sir, I was.
And what was that approximation?
I can't recall.
Can you recall approximately?
No, sir.
Okay. And you recognize that in some cases, the gay and lesbians that are raising children, that one of them is a biological child of the parents, and in some cases they are raising adoptive children, one or the other, correct?
Well, those would be two of well, of course, they would be. Those would be examples of those. Those would be examples of children in gay and lesbian homes. Yes.
And you believe that permitting gay and lesbian couples to marry would significantly advantage the gay and lesbians themselves and the children they are raising, correct, sir?
When you say advantage, do you mean improve the well-being of?
Yes.
Well, my answer to your question is that I believe that adopting same-sex marriage would be likely to improve the well-being of gay and lesbian households and their children.
All right. Now, in binder number 1, we have a copy of your book, Future of Marriage, and I think that's Defendant's Exhibit 956.
Well, I do not have a copy with me here, if you're addressing your question to me.
No, I think
It's in the binder, I believe, Mr. Blankenhorn.
it's in the binder, the binder we handed you. In other words, the binder.
Yes. What, the binder you handed me?
Yes, the binder that your counsel handed you only had the cover page.
Yes, yes.
So we have handed you a binder that, unless we have screwed it up in some way, ought to have the entire book in it.
Oh, okay. Well, if you tell me the number, I'll track it down.
Okay, 956, Defendant's 956. Now, this is an excerpt. It's not the whole book, but it is more pages than just the top page.
Got it.
Okay.
That's a pretty short excerpt.
Well, it's not the whole book, but it's longer than just the cover page. Would you turn to page 2 of the book, sir?
Yes, sir.
And the last 2 sentences, and for context, you may want to read earlier in the paragraph. You will see that you're writing there on this issue of same-sex marriage. And is this a profound principle of equal dignity, the heart of the matter? After all, part of the reason why the principle is so revolutionary is that it can grow and deepen over time. Groups that have long been considered effectively outside the moral reach, African Americans, women, people of certain colors or languages or religion, can over time, and often as a result of great struggle, enter into its protective sphere. And then you get to 2 questions that I want to particularly direct your attention to. You say, I believe that today the principle of equal human dignity must apply to gay and lesbian persons. You see that?
Yes, sir.
And the I there is you, correct?
That's correct.
And you say, in that sense, insofar as we are a nation founded on this principle, we would be more, emphasize more, American on the day we permitted same-sex marriage than we were on the day before. And you wrote those words, did you not, sir?
I wrote those words.
And you believed them then, correct?
That's correct.
And do you believe them now, correct?
That's correct.
Now, let me direct your attention to some of the scholars that you said you relied on. And Mr. Cooper took you through a number of publications by a number of scholars, and you indicated that you had relied on what they had written. Do you recall that?
I do recall.
Now, were any of the scholars that you and Mr. Cooper identified scholars who have asserted that permitting same-sex marriage would cause a reduction in heterosexual marriage? Now, if you don't understand the question, I will try to make it clear.
No, I do understand it, and I say it back to you, see if I got it? I think you're asking me, did any of the scholars that I have cited, do they believe that adopting same-sex marriage would lower the marriage rate among heterosexuals?
Almost. And I just want to clarify one thing. You said believe, and I said asserted. And I'm not asking you to try to probe their minds. I'm simply asking what they have said and written. You understand the difference, what I'm saying?
Yes.
And what I'm asking you is whether any of the scholars that you have relied on have asserted that permitting same-sex marriage would result in a lower rate of heterosexual marriage.
I think the safest answer would, for me, be to say, I don't know. But if you'll permit me, I believe the answer is yes, some of them have.
Well, in that case, what I will now do is ask you which ones.
Well, I thought you might. That's why I was kind of careful walking into it, but
yeah, it comes from those discussions.
Yes. Yeah, well. Professor Norval Glenn, in his article called "The Struggle for Same-Sex Marriage," I have not reread that article in some time, but I know he is a long time, and I've read many other things of his, and he is. I know him. And I believe that he has voiced reservations about same-sex marriage along the lines of this statement that I read from in the article. That is, that he is saying yes.
I need you to focus relatively precisely, if I can, on my question. Did you read, or Mr. Cooper read to you a portion from Mr. Glenn's article where he was talking about the deinstitutionalization of marriage? And I do remember that, right? Now, my question is a little different, okay? My question is whether Mr. Glenn or any scholar that you relied on has asserted that permitting same-sex marriage would result in a lower rate of heterosexual marriage.
And I know the problem here, and I'm not trying to be evasive, but you must let me.
No,
say my answer, which is that if
I don't have to do this. All is going to happen is that you're going to say something, then I'm going to have to say something to follow it up, okay? Now, what I'm trying to do, and this is a very simple question, all right?
Well, it is not simple to me.
All right, well, then let me try and make it simple. Let me try and make it simple.
No, if you're using the exact form
if
of
you're
the
trying
word.
to
Look, let's not argue with each other. Let's just have a question and an answer.
All right. Let me make this question as simple as I can, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Have any of the scholars that you have said you relied on said in words or substance, okay, this permitting same-sex marriage will cause a reduction in heterosexual marriage? Now, that's yes, no, or I don't know.
No, I know the answer. I cannot answer you accurately if the only words I'm allowed to choose from are yes or no. I can't give you an honest, I can give you my answer very briefly, one sentence.
If you know the answer, why don't you share it with us?
Well, I would be happy to, but he is only permitting me to give a yes and no, and I cannot do that and be accurate.
He's giving you 3 choices, yes, no, I don't know.
But I do know the answer.
Then is it yes or is it no?
Yeah, Your Honor, I can answer the question, but I cannot give an accurate answer if the only 2 choices I have are yes and no. If you give me a sentence, I can answer it. Well, no, 1 sentence is all I'm asking for.
All right. Let's take a sentence. 1 sentence.
Can you ask me the question again, please?
Yes, yes. Have any of the scholars who you say you relied on asserted, written, that they believe that permitting same-sex marriage will result in a reduction in the heterosexual marriage rates?
Well, my answer is that I believe that some of the scholars I have cited have asserted that permitting same-sex marriage would contribute to the deinstitutionalization of marriage. One of the manifestations of which would be a lower marriage rate among heterosexuals. But I do not have sure knowledge that in the exact form of words you're asking me for, they have made the direct assertion that permitting same-sex marriage would directly lower the marriage rate among heterosexuals.
Mr. Blankenthorne.
Horn.
Blankenhorn.
That wasn't too long.
Questions and answers?
I take that as I don't know. Would that be fair?
Well, with respect, John, I would disagree with you. I know exactly my answer to this question, and I have just stated it, and I'd be happy to restate it.
No, the record is clear on what you said.
Let me try to see if I can clarify what you meant. You have said that some of the scholars have said that permitting same-sex marriage would lead to the deinstitutionalization of marriage. And you have said that the deinstitutionalization of marriage would lead or might lead to reduced heterosexual marriage rates. You said that, right, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now, what I'm asking you is whether the linkage that says the deinstitutionalization of marriage leads to lower heterosexual marriage rates is something that the scholars said, or is that something that you are saying?
Scholars.
Okay, now, what scholars have said that the deinstitutionalization of marriage will lead to lower heterosexual divorce rates? What scholars?
No, I think that you mean to say marriage rates.
Marriage rates.
Would you like me to name one?
I would like you to name every one that you know.
Okay, I will. It's going to take me a moment to compose my memory here, but let's start with...
Well, let's be sure that we know the question. The question is, which of the scholars that you have said to Mr. Cooper that you rely on are scholars who have written, 1, that permitting same-sex marriage leads to the deinstitutionalization of marriage, and 2, that the deinstitutionalization of marriage leads to lower rates of heterosexual marriage? Now, do you have the question clear?
Well, I thought you were asking me to name scholars on whom I relied to form my opinions. I did not know that you were asking me to restrict it to the few that you were enumerated in the colloquy with Mr. Cooper. I thought you were asking me, am I aware of scholars who make this claim? Now, if you're asking me to choose among the few scholars that were involved in the earlier colloquy, my answer would be that, to the best of my knowledge, Professor Glenn has argued that permitting same-sex marriage would likely lead to the further deinstitutionalization of marriage. I'm not saying he used those exact form of words, but I am saying the substance of his arguments, written arguments, have been such, and I'm saying that, in addition to that, Professor Glenn has argued that the deinstitutionalization of marriage has a manifestation of lower participation rates of heterosexuals in marriage. I'm saying that Professor Norval Glenn is one such person among the very small number that were cited in this, that's the universe you are limiting me to. I'm saying that to the best of my knowledge. The answer to your question is Professor Norval Glenn.
And
I'll also add that he is one of the most distinguished family scholars in the nation.
anybody other than Professor Glenn, one of the scholars that you told Mr. Cooper that you were relying on? Anybody else?
Well, informing my views on this...
Mr. Blankenhorn?
My views are not restricted to the few that are on this list.
Your Honor, could I please,
If you want to know who I rely on...
This is a simple question.
I'm happy to tell you.
He identified several scholars that he said to Mr. Cooper that he relied on.
They were illustrative only.
I will accept that that's your testimony, that these were illustrative only.
I have others that you would be pleased to know their pedigree, and I'd be happy to give them to you.
I think Mr. Boies is asking for their names.
Professor David Popenoe from Rutgers University would be another one.
Okay. Now, is this somebody who has written that the permitting same-sex marriage leads to the deinstitutionalization of marriage, and that in turn leads to a lower heterosexual marriage rate, correct?
Well, my only hesitation in answering yes is that I have not refreshed myself on his exact writings and whether the form of words are close enough to satisfy your concerns. But it's my belief, based on an extensive acquaintance with his books and writings in recent years, that those represent the substance of his beliefs. And I can't sit here right now without reference to his works to prove it in exact word formulation. So I want to issue that caveat, but I believe if he were here right now, sitting here, and you asked him, I believe he would say, yes, those are my beliefs.
Okay. Now, Mr. Blankenhorn, I want to try and make this as clear to you as I possibly can, that my questions here are asking about what these people have written. Not what you think they would say if we brought them in to testify. Not what you think is in their heart or mind based on your conversations with them, but what they have actually written. Do you understand the difference?
Of course I do.
So, focusing on that, and I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce David's last name. Could you give that to me again?
Popenoe.
Popenoe. Is it your testimony that Mr. Popenoe, Professor Popenoe, may or may not have actually written something in which he said, A, permitting same-sex marriage leads to the deinstitutionalization of marriage, and B, the deinstitutionalization of marriage leads to a lower rate of heterosexual marriage, correct?
I know that he has written. I'm trying to answer your question. You know, it's an important issue, and I'm trying to give you a short but clear answer.
But if you answer the questions that I'm actually posing...
I'm doing so to the very best of my ability. I come all the way here from New York to answer your questions absolutely to the best of my ability. And my answer is that I believe that Professor... I know certainly that he has written that the deinstitutionalization of marriage would likely lead to lower rates of marriage among heterosexuals. I believe, but I'm not certain, that he's written that same-sex marriage would likely contribute to deinstitutionalization.
Okay. Now, while we were talking, I was trying to read through Norval Glenn's article, which you have here, and while I haven't maybe read it as carefully as I would like, I don't see anything in here where he talks about heterosexual marriage rates. Do you recall anything in here about heterosexual marriage rates?
I was relying for that statement on a paper that he wrote several years ago that I was involved in. That's why I can remember it, where he was a co-author of a paper that talked extensively about deinstitutionalization. And in that paper, of which he was a co-author, it specifically talked about lowering marriage rates as a likely consequence.
And was that paper you just referred to one of the documents that you relied on in your expert testimony
I don't
here?
recall now whether
why
it
don't
was.
you look?
Okay. Now, maybe I misunderstood something, but it never occurred to me that everything I would say regarding my views had to be represented in the list of documents, yeah? I have been studying this topic for more than 20 years, and I certainly am relying on many, many more things other than a few things in this report.
The question is whether or not this is reflected in your expert report.
Well, it's reflected in the sense that this was the thing that influenced my thinking, but let's answer the question of whether it is listed.
No, wait a minute. You listed the things that you considered and relied on, correct? Mm-hmm. That's what you were asked to do, correct?
No, maybe I made a mistake, but it certainly never occurred to me that all of the views that I expressed had to be traceable to one of those documents at the end of this report. If I'd understood that that was the requirement, there would have been many, many scores more documents cited. They would have gone back for 20 years of the work and the study and reflection that I have done on this issue.
Mr. Blankenthorn.
Yeah.
Mr.
Horn.
Blankenhorn. Blankenhorn.
Well, let's find out. No, let's
apologize.
find out if it's listed. That would solve the whole problem.
That would. Although, even regardless of whether it is listed or not, I do want to follow up on some things you just said.
Well, no, sir, it's not listed.
Okay, now, at the end of your expert report, you prepared an index of materials considered, correct?
I believe that that's the list I was just looking over to see if I could find Norval Glenn's article.
And it wasn't there, correct?
No, sir, I did not find it upon reading it quickly.
Well, I don't find it either. There's a Norval Glenn article, but it's a different article, correct?
Well, that's right. There's a different article.
No. Now, maybe the easiest way for me to approach this is to go through the materials that you went through with Mr. Cooper, and I will try to go through them as quickly as I possibly can. Turn to tab 3. Now, it's in your book. Yes, sir, in your book.
Yes. Let me see here. Hold on. Yeah, I got it.
All right. And this is an excerpt from a book by Suzanne G. Fraser, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, does Dr. Fraser assert that permitting same-sex marriage would cause a reduction in heterosexual marriage rates?
I do not know of her having made such an assertion.
Okay. Does Professor Fraser assert that permitting same-sex marriage would result in an increase of heterosexual divorce rates?
In the interest of moving along, I think I can say that I do not know of any statement about same-sex marriage that Suzanne Fraser has made. I don't know of any comment that she has made on that topic.
Okay. Let's go on to the next expert that you told Mr. Cooper you relied on. Tab number 4, Professor Quayle, the book, The History of Marriage Systems. There? Okay. Now, does Professor Quayle assert anywhere that permitting same-sex marriage would cause a reduction of heterosexual marriage rates?
My answer is the same. I'm not aware of Professor Quayle, having in this book made any comments one way or the other about, because this was 1988, and it would have been highly unlikely for her or anyone to be writing about it, but the answer is no. I do not know of anything she said in this book or elsewhere on the subject of same-sex marriages. I'm not aware of anything.
Did Professor Quayle assert that the deinstitutionalization of marriage, however it was caused, would result in a reduction in heterosexual marriage?
No, sir. Nor was I relying upon her to talk about deinstitutionalization. She's under the section under what is marriage. She's under that, under the section of what is marriage, not about what is same-sex marriage, and not what is the theory of deinstitutionalization. If you want to talk about sources for my views on deinstitutionalization, I can save you some time, take you right to them. But no, she does not, in this book, discuss same-sex marriage. And to the best of my knowledge, she doesn't use the term deinstitutionalization. She is a historian, and deinstitutionalization is a term that comes from sociology.
So maybe we can move this thing along. Neither Professor Fraser, nor Professor Quayle, nor Professor Kingsley Davis, nor the Committee of the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, nor Professor Vandenberg, nor Professor Malinowski, none of them talk about, insofar as you were relying on them, talk about same-sex marriage or talk about the deinstitutionalization of marriage, correct?
That would be correct.
Okay. Did you say that would not be correct?
I said that. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I'm sorry. That would not be correct.
That would not be correct.
That's correct.
Okay. It didn't work up to speed. It didn't work to
but
speed.
but may I clarify?
It was a compound question, but I thought,
Mr. Boies,
let me do it my way.
I was trying to save us some time.
I was too. But first, Professor Fraser. Professor Fraser does not deal with the deinstitutionalization of marriage. Does not deal with the same-sex marriage issue at all, correct?
Nor was I relying upon her for any of my views on the subject. The answer is no, she doesn't.
Or the answer is yes, she doesn't.
Yes, she does not.
And Professor Quayle, does he...
Same.
Does Professor Quayle deal at all with the deinstitutionalization of marriage or with same-sex marriage?
Not my knowledge, no, sir.
Okay, Professor Kingsley Davis. Does Professor Davis deal at all with same-sex marriage or the deinstitutionalization of marriage?
Yes, sir. Based on my memory, I'm confident, well, I would say that based on my memory of his writings, that he does speak either with specific use of the word deinstitutionalization, because he is a sociologist, or, making the same argument. So my best understanding of that, he does speak about that issue in his work.
Okay, now you see, if you begin with a yes, no, or I don't know answer, then...
Well, now we're back to the same old problem.
But you got to the yes at the end of that long speech, and what I'm trying to do
It wasn't a very long speech.
Well, let's not argue about that, or we'll be here too long, okay?
Okay.
Now, what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to ask the questions, and you get to answer them.
Well, that's what they tell me.
And I get to choose what questions I ask. And my questions are designed to be precise questions so that I get a yes or a no answer, or you can say I don't know.
No, sir. Often the questions are not amenable to those three choices. And I often know the answer that I wish to give. I can give it briefly, but I cannot give the answer sometimes if the only words I'm allowed to choose from are yes or no.
Well, but when I'm asking a question like, does Professor Kingsley Davis address the issue of the deinstitutionalization of same-sex marriage? Or if he addresses the issue of deinstitutionalization or the issue of same-sex marriage, you can answer that question with a yes, no, can't you, sir?
Well, that's not the question you just asked, but if you would ask it that way, the answer is yes.
Okay, good. Now, he does do so in the article that you just relied on?
I don't know. Oh, yeah, see, I did it.
Good for you,
Yeah.
yes. And if I could give you a gold star, I would.
But that's when the answer really was, I don't know.
So, now, does he do so in any materials that you have indicated that you considered in your expert report?
Well, see, now we're back to the problem of what's in the expert report. I have read a lot of stuff by him, and I believe that he does talk about it, but well, let's go back and look at the list. I can tell you that I have relied on his work in forming my view.
Why don't you just answer the question?
Well, I have to read the list in order to tell whether any other article
Well, please do so, and when you finish, please let me know.
is listed here. I will. Well, my quick reading here shows me that there are no other cites to Davis other than the one we are discussing.
Okay. Now, if you turn to tab 6, the Notes and Queries on Anthropology by the Committee of the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland.
Yes, sir.
Now, does this publication address, as you recall, either the issue of same-sex marriage or the issue of the deinstitutionalization of marriage?
And I know for a fact that it does not discuss the issue of same-sex marriage with, using that term, same-sex marriage. It does not. It does not. But it is my belief that it does, in specifically or in substance, discuss the process of deinstitutionalization.
Well, can you find where it does so?
Well, I only have a few pages here. If you could give me the book, I could. I believe I could find it for you.
All right, let me get that. And let me get that while we are going on to some other questions. And the next question is at tab 7. Professor Vandenberg was another witness that you said you relied on, correct?
I relied on these views, yes, about the definition of marriage, not about deinstitutionalization or same-sex marriage. I have tried to make that clear.
Well, that's actually what I'm trying to make clear also. And in fact, one of the things that I'm trying to make clear is that these people that you spent your time on direct examination testifying that you relied on don't talk about in these materials they don't talk about it at all. They don't talk about same-sex marriage or the deinstitutionalization of marriage. I'm just trying to make that point.
I'm agreeing with you, by and large, and telling you that their area of study is marriage.
Yeah, it's the by and large part.
We've already found Kingsley Davis talking about deinstitutionalization and a couple of these others.
Wait a minute. Where did we find Kingsley Davis talking about?
I think, wasn't my testimony before that I thought Kingsley Davis and his work does discuss the process of deinstitutionalization?
Yes, you said you thought that was so, but it wasn't in the materials that were in your book, and it wasn't
Well, if we are back to that...
Well, let me finish at least. And it wasn't in the materials that were listed in your report, correct, sir?
The only
This is a yes or no answer, sir.
If you're asking me...
Your Honor, can I get a yes or no answer to this question, please?
Do you have the question in mind?
No, sir, I don't, Your Honor.
Then perhaps you could restate it.
Okay. To the extent that Professor Davis addressed the issue of the deinstitutionalization of marriage, he did so outside of the publication that was in your book and outside anything that is listed in your expert report, correct?
No, sir. I believe that it is certainly true that it's outside anything listed in this report. I can't...
Well, it's also outside the publication from Professor Davis. That is in your book.
And I can't recall the ways in which I did or didn't use Professor Davis's work in my book.
No, not in your book. I apologize. I think I created this whole confusion. You think you're talking about your book being one of your books like The Future of Marriage, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, I apologize. I was meaning to refer to the binder that you used with your counsel.
Well, then the answer is yes, it is not. Your statement is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Professor Malinowski, would it be accurate to say that in the publication that is in the binder that you were using with your counsel that you said you relied on, that Professor Malinowski does not deal with either same-sex marriage or with the deinstitutionalization of marriage?
That would not be correct.
That would not be correct. Okay. Does Professor Malinowski in this book deal with same-sex marriage?
No, sir.
No. Okay. Okay.
No, sir.
Does he deal with the subject of the deinstitutionalization of marriage?
You know, I don't think he uses the word, but I'm pretty confident that he... Well, I know. In his writings as a whole, he talks about the process of deinstitutionalization.
Now, when you say his writings as a whole, you mean writings other than what's here in your binder?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you may not have understood the question, but the question was, in the materials that you told your counsel that you relied on, that are in your binder, in those materials, does Professor Malinowski deal at all with the subject of deinstitutionalization of marriage?
I don't know.
Okay. Tab 10, Professor Levi Strauss.
Well, you know, I think I can save time by saying that he does not talk about same-sex marriage, and I don't know whether in this particular writing he deals with the process of deinstitutionalization of marriage.
Okay, that does speed things along. Now, do you have any materials that you have listed as materials considered or relied on in your expert report from Professor Levi Strauss other than this publication?
I'm quite confident that I have not included anything other than this one cited article. I've read his work extensively, and they have been very important influences on my views, but the only thing listed here is this one piece.
Okay. Now, tab 11. The Law Commission of Canada. This does deal with same-sex marriage, correct?
It does, yes. Well, not only, but it does deal with it.
Not only, no. Does the Law Commission of Canada assert in the materials that you have here before you, that you say you relied on, that same-sex marriage may result in the reduction of heterosexual marriage rates?
I don't know.
Does the Law Commission of Canada, in the materials that you have in front of you, that you said you relied on, assert that permitting same-sex marriage may cause an increase in heterosexual divorce rates?
You know, my strong suspicion is that they did not, because they are endorsing same-sex marriage, and they are endorsing what I would view to be the radical deinstitutionalization of marriage in general. So it would be my supposition, without having reread the entire article recently, that it would be very strong speculation, my very strong speculation, that they made no such statement in this document.
And did the Law Commission of Canada, in the materials that you have in front of you and that you say you relied on, assert that permitting same-sex marriage might lead to a trend towards polygamy? That is a yes, no, or I don't know.
I believe that they do endorse, at least indirectly.
Your Honor, this really is a question that can be answered with yes, no, or I don't know.
It just depends if you want to know what I think about it.
Well, that's the next question, perhaps. And a question that Mr. Cooper can pursue. But Mr. Boies is entitled.
Okay. And I don't know whether they approve or...
Okay.
Okay. Now, whether they said that same-sex marriage would lead or could lead to polygamy.
Okay. And again, did the Law Commission of Canada and the materials that you have in front of you, that you say you relied on, assert that permitting same-sex marriage might cause an increase in the children raised outside of marriage? Again, yes, no, or I don't know.
Well, they are strongly advocating for the trend, so
Your Honor, he keeps doing this.
I wonder, in view of the hour, whether a good night's sleep might be helpful.
Thank you.
Might that not be helpful in moving us along?
I think it might. I hope it will.
All right. Now, there's a realistic possibility that we could conclude with the presentation of the evidence sometime in the morning, sometime before noon.
Let me confer with counsel. Your Honor, I think this is the last witness. There may be some short documentary evidence to come, but I think there is, there is a hope, and I will try to sharpen my questions, and perhaps the witness can think about sharpening his answers, and if we can work together, maybe we can get it done.
Very well. Let me ask Mr. Cooper, are you planning to present Mr. Schubert as a witness?
No, Your Honor, not if we can work these document issues out, which we think we can.
Very well. So then we should be able to conclude the presentation of evidence with Mr. Blankenhorn and then any documentary evidence that you may want to put in. Is that what I understand Mr. Boies to be saying?
Yes, yes.
Well, I'll look forward to it, and that should enable us to conclude sometime before noon. Is that correct?
Yes, I think yes, Your Honor.
Do you agree, Mr. Cooper?
I do agree with that, yes. Starting at
8:30 again tomorrow. 8:30, right, Your Honor?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Have a pleasant evening.
Thank you, Your Honor.